All right, coming to you by popular demand. This has been asked for quite a bit recently, and so I wanted to do a video on this. Is a comparison across different node implementations, different Bitcoin node implementations. So we're going to be talking about all of that, unpacking different plug and play options, do-it-yourself options. You are not going to want to miss a thing. Let's jump in. All right, so as you'll notice, I've got a different setup here. I'm doing a bit of traveling in Costa Rica. I was just at the Bitcoin Freedom Festival, which shout out if you can ever attend in the future. I'm hoping they do it every year. You definitely should. It was a pretty magical experience. But I'm spending some time down here, and so hopefully this setup, the audio, hopefully it's okay. It's definitely not what I'm normally doing, and so you'll have to bear with me. But we've got a meaty one for today. Again, this is one of the most requested videos I've seen recently, and so I wanted to address that. And so first and foremost, if you are brand new to the idea of Bitcoin nodes, why you might want to run one, what are the potential reasons for why you might want to do that, I have done a whole video on just that topic. In fact, I have a whole playlist on running your node, starting with that sort of motivation of why you would want to do this. And so the very, very first thing you want to think about is like, what is your use case? Why do you want to do this? If it is just to validate your own transactions, fetch your own data from the Bitcoin blockchain, broadcast your own transactions, that probably maps to one approach. If you want to then start to do some heavier stuff with either the Lightning Network or potentially use this as a broader home server in addition to your Bitcoin node, and again, there's pros and cons to that, then that probably means a different setup. And then lastly, maybe you're running a small business and you want to have some sort of, server for that. That probably implies yet another flavor of this. So what is your goal on that sort of spectrum? What is your budget, importantly, right? And do you want to build the node yourself, i.e. this sort of do-it-yourself version, or do you want to get a plug and play, meaning, it's just sort of out of the box, literally, it's probably a box that you'll receive, plug into the wall, plug into your internet router, and away you go. If you want to do this mostly as a learning opportunity, as a hobbyist, and maybe you want to do a little bit of Lightning Network stuff, but you're not going to be running this like crazy routing node, I would actually really strongly advise you to go the do-it-yourself route. Not only is that going to be cheaper, it's also going to give you an appreciation for how computer hardware works, for how Bitcoin software works in a more intimate way than if you were to just go the plug and play route. Again, do-it-yourself is not for everyone. And on this channel, I have a couple tutorials that go into building a node from scratch. I've done one for a Raspberry Pi and Umbrel, as well as a Cubit and Citadel, and we'll talk about all of that. So before we get into the different options and what are out there and comparing and contrasting, I want to go through just a quick framework of the things that you ideally want to be thinking about to help inform your decision. The first is what Bitcoin software is supported by different options. There's, of course, Bitcoin Core, which is the most common implementation of Bitcoin software. There's also Bitcoin Knots. There's also Libitcoin. There's also BTCD. This one is pretty advanced. Vast majority of the plug-and-play versions are going to have Bitcoin Core as the underlying Bitcoin software. But if for whatever reason you have a particular interest in some of these others, then that becomes an important consideration. Next is Lightning. Importantly, do you want to do stuff with the Lightning Network? For those not familiar, I have a whole playlist on Lightning. What is it? How does it work as this sort of layer 2 on top of the base Bitcoin protocol? It enables cheaper, faster payments. And assuming the answer is yes, I want to run not just a Bitcoin full node, but also a Lightning node on top of that, you may want to consider what Lightning implementation. The big ones are LND, which is developed by Lightning Labs. You also have C Lightning, developed by Blockstream, and you also have Eclair, developed by Async, and a few other flavors like LDK, but primarily the biggest two by far, at least when it comes to what you're going to find on these plug and play node products, are going to be LND and C Lightning. But again, if you happen to have a preference, that would of course be something to think about as well. But keep in mind, all those implementations are interoperable with each other when it comes to basic payments on the Lightning Network. The next dimension, keeping with the software theme of these first categories or first factors that you want to think about, is the node software itself. You have things like Umbrel OS, you have things like Start OS. This is the software that allows you to interface with your node, and it's typically going to have some sort of GUI or graphical user interface that allows you to perform different actions, whether it's opening a Lightning channel or receiving a on-chain Bitcoin payment. Or, and this is also something to think about, in a lot of these, you now have started to have these app marketplaces. So all sorts of other different tools to help manage your Lightning node, tools to do privacy techniques like coin joins. If you want this to be a broader home server, not just your Bitcoin node and Lightning node, you now have a dizzying array of, basically running a media server, right? Like being able to do file storage on your node. Communications, you have different Nostr apps that are now available as plugins on these app marketplaces. So particularly if you want this to be a broader thing than just your Bitcoin node and Lightning node, and to be clear, I think there's a really good argument for why you don't want to do that. A lot of people say, well, look, like if I'm going to be running on this dedicated computer, all my Bitcoin stuff, I want to keep it that way. I don't want to kind of have all this other stuff. Although I'm not personally aware of instances in which having these other apps has led to, security issues or anything like that. So I'm merely stating this as a kind of theoretical exercise, at least in my own experience. And so there are a lot of people that say, hey, yeah, like I don't want to trust, Google Cloud. I don't want to trust all these other clouds. Like I want to run my own. I want to run my own hardware. I want to do everything on my own. Is depending on where you fall there. Some of the options that we will go through have extremely rich ecosystems of these additional apps, whereas others do not. So those are some of the software considerations, which again map very well to that very first consideration of like, what is it you want to do and achieve? Let's now talk about the next factor, which is hardware. And this is a big one. So you're gonna wanna look at things like the CPU or GPU of the machine. We'll talk about some of the different options there, but basically how fast is this machine? You don't need like crazy, incredible performance to be clear. If you are simply running a Bitcoin full node and you want to just sort of validate your on-chain transactions and broadcast your transactions yourself without trusting on someone else's node, like the bar there is quite low. But then if you're trying to do all these other things, if you're trying to run all these different services on this machine, you're definitely going to want a beefier, stronger, faster computer that's sitting at the core. And in a lot of cases, this is going to be like a single board computer. A lot of people have used a Raspberry Pi as a very nice option in the past. I've done a tutorial on setting up a Raspberry Pi 4 from scratch for a Bitcoin node, and we'll talk about some of the specs there and why that may or may not be the best option for you in just a moment. Storage is extremely important as a subcomponent of hardware. As of the making of this video, the Bitcoin blockchain is roughly around 550 gigabytes in size. So a lot of nodes today have 1 terabyte of storage, but as you can imagine, that's not particularly future-proofed, right? So a lot of those nodes that are currently 1 terabyte are eventually going to need to upgrade. And so if you're doing this from scratch right now, today in 2024, if I were you, I would probably go straight to a 2 terabyte option just to be a little more future-proofed. Again, that's going to be more costly. And so there's, of course, the trade-off. You don't have to do that. You could do whatever you want. But again, if I were you, if I was setting up a new node today, that's probably what I would do, is go with 2 terabyte storage. And as we will discuss, a lot of the plug and play options have the ability to kind of toggle between, 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte, and of course you pay extra for the latter. Depending on either the node software that's being used or how kind of do it yourself you want to do this, it's probably also important to understand like connectivity. How many USB ports do they have? Are they USB 2.0, 3.0? You want to also think about the internet connectivity. A lot of the plug and play versions and a lot of do-it-yourself versions for that matter are going to have a gigabit Ethernet port. So you'll plug in the Ethernet cable into your node and then plug the other end into your router. That's important because it takes a long time, potentially several days at this point, to sync the Bitcoin blockchain. So when you start your node up for the very first time, the first thing it's going to do is download from the Genesis block all the different Bitcoin transaction information and block information across the entire history. So that is going to be a process that takes time, several days in most cases. For a really excellent treatment on the speed at which it takes to download the Bitcoin blockchain and sync the Bitcoin blockchain from scratch, James Lopp does an annual performance test. So I will link this in the description down below if you want to take a look at that, if you're curious about any of that. Has some really good information there. And then lastly, and this is a little bit more advanced, but you may want to consider the ability for your hardware to support additional storage arrays for you to do some sort of RAID mirroring. If you're unfamiliar with this concept, just Google RAID mirroring, and it's basically this idea of duplicating the data in your hard drive across another drive so that if something happens and one of the drives gets corrupted, you still have a fallback in the duplicated data, right? Like if you're trying to run a beefy Lightning routing node and really kind of spend some time on this as a way to earn some yield on your Bitcoin, and like this is a way to earn yield on your Bitcoin. This is not Fugazi kind of magic out of nothing. You are providing a service on the Lightning Network of routing payments and can charge fees for that service. You lock up Bitcoin in your Lightning channels and then earn a yield in the form of fees as you route payments. Like that is a way to earn a yield on your Bitcoin, but it takes a good amount of effort. So be advised there. But if that is something you want to do and try, RAID mirroring or having some sort of backup like that is probably a very good idea, because the channel DB as part of your Lightning Network backend in cases can get corrupted, right? It hasn't personally happened to me in several years of running this, but there have been stories out there of people getting corrupted data. And then it's a huge pain, depending on what node software you're using, to potentially restore that. And there have been people that haven't been able to restore it. And then you'll get your channels force closed and hopefully all is well. But, you know, so there's some things that can happen there that can be big headaches. And having some sort of backup is important. You may also, depending on where you live, want to consider a backup battery. So if your power goes out in your home, the node is just going to switch over to this battery, right? Because your node should be online all the time, 24/7 every day, particularly if you're running Lightning. A lot of times if you open Lightning channels with other peers and you're dormant for a certain period of time, now we're not talking like a day, but some of the really big, well-connected nodes are going to have policies where they say, hey, if you're inactive for a certain period of time, we're just going to force close, you know, that channel. So you do want to think about uptime. Uptime is important. It's not the end of the world if there's a huge storm and the power goes out and you're like, oh my gosh, is my Bitcoin node, am I going to lose my Bitcoin? No, you're not going to lose any of your on-chain Bitcoin, and you're probably not going to lose any of your Bitcoin on Lightning, provided that you can, you know, get it back up in a reasonable amount of time. Okay, so that's a bit of a framework of like the things to think about. We talked about your goal that should guide all of this. And so now let's get into some of the options. Starting at like the most sort of basic level, if you have an old laptop, you could go to bitcoin.org and just download Bitcoin Core and run that bad boy on an old laptop. And honestly, that could be a good way to start, just to learn a little bit more about Bitcoin Core, how it works, you know, practicing using the wallet that's embedded in Bitcoin Core. Like all of that is a pretty good learning experience. And it is very simple and straightforward to do. That may either be something that you try out initially, or it could be your ongoing setup. If again, your use case is super basic and you're like, dude, I just do on-chain transactions. I just want to validate, you know, my own transactions. I don't want to trust anyone else to do that for me, you know, that could be a really simple option. People like Armin the Parman have written really good guides on that. You do want to be a little bit careful with that. But from a cost standpoint, that could be like literally free if you already have, you know, an old laptop laying around. The next sort of phase up from that are probably different do-it-yourself versions. And so this basically means you're going out, you're sourcing the parts. Again, you can get all of this from Amazon. A lot of people have built their own nodes using a Raspberry Pi 4, which is a nice single board computer option. Particularly the Model B of the Raspberry Pi 4, like the specs really aren't awful. I think it has a 1.8 gigahertz quad core CPU. You can get either 1, 2, 4, or 8 gigabit RAM options, depending on the model. It has gigabit Ethernet connection. And the 4 gigabit RAM option, which is probably like the bare minimum that you'd want to do, will probably cost you like $50 for the board and probably between $100 and $200 total for all the other things you need, like the drive for the storage, etc. So you could build a bare bones Raspberry Pi 4 based, 1 terabyte drive type of node for probably between $100 to $200 total. And I will put my tutorial of just that example up here if you want to take a look. With that being said, I did that a little while ago, and the Raspberry Pi 5 model I think has come out. In most cases that I've looked in the US, it's sort of listed as pre-order. So it's not clear if those are flying off the shelves yet or what, but it's clear that we're like imminently close. And so if you're gonna go this do-it-yourself route with the Raspberry Pi, I would probably recommend waiting a little bit and going with the Raspberry Pi 5, simply because it's 2 to 3 times as fast and powerful as the Raspberry Pi 4. And I'm seeing the retail price here for like 80 bucks for the board. So it's really not even that much more expensive than the Raspberry Pi 4. But the other thing you should be aware of is that some of the Node software that you're gonna be considering, it looks like does not yet support Raspberry 5 either. We can see this tweet from Umbrel just a little bit ago saying that they are working on it as an example. And I'm not aware of some of the other options that are supporting Raspberry Pi 5 just yet, but I think it is only a matter of time. We're probably talking on the order of a couple months. And so again, if I'm you, if I'm doing the do-it-yourself version on a Raspberry Pi device, I'm probably gonna wait for the 5, get the 5, wait for the software to catch up, and away you go. And that $80, by the way, for the Raspberry Pi 5 option, that's for like 8 gigs RAM, which is twice as much as the price I quoted for the Raspberry Pi 4. So again, a much better machine for not that much more cost. And of course, there are other computer options that you could consider. There's the Rock 64, there's the Rock Pro 64, which is the kernel underneath the Ronin Dojo Tanto node option that we will talk about. There's various Odroid kernels that you could use, which is the board that's used in something like the Cubit, which we will talk about. There's just like way too many to cover. So those are just a couple of things that I have either personal experience with, and so if you look it up elsewhere on Reddit, you're gonna find trillions of different opinions, and each one is going to be very specific and unique to that individual. So don't be too obsessed about like, oh, I got to get a Raspberry Pi or I got to get a Rock Pro 64. Look at the specs in terms of CPU, in terms of RAM, in terms of the storage that's available, and make your decision based on that. Of course, the other dimension is whether there are any closed source components of these boards. Some of them do have closed source drivers for certain things. But that might be another thing to think about. But again, all the ones that I rattled off are really good options. So we talked about running Bitcoin Core on an old laptop. We talked about the do-it-yourself version. Again, I have 2 example tutorials on this channel for how to do that step by step. And for some of the other node implementations that I haven't yet done on this channel, they have typically pretty good documentation. For example, I have not yet covered Start9 and StartOS. If you go on their website, you'll see some really good documentation for how you can do the do-it-yourself version. So again, if you're a tinkerer, if you want this to be a learning experience, I really would recommend going the do-it-yourself route. It really is a fun project. You're gonna feel really good about yourself once you've built that out. And again, check out those other tutorials. Like, it really is not that hard. Like, you can do this. But let's say for whatever reason, and there are many, that you might want to go with a more plug and play version, right? It's just a box that you receive, you plug it into the wall, you plug it into your router, you pull up a certain web page on your laptop, and away you go. This would be appropriate for people who just simply don't want to do the do-it-yourself version, who are maybe like completely non-technical. Again, you don't have to be particularly technical to do the do-it-yourself, but that certainly helps. And or if your use case demands beefier hardware, the plug and play options are probably also going to be the best options for you. Not to say you couldn't build out a beefier thing yourself. My Cubit tutorial is a good example of that. But in either case, let's say that you're like, you know what, I want to go plug and play. So let's compare the different options available there. Okay, so we're gonna start with Umbrel. Umbrel shot out of the gate in 2020, 2021, and really became probably the most popular node implementation just because they made it really easy, and their software is absolutely beautiful. So of course you can do a do-it-yourself version with Umbrel using something like a Raspberry Pi. Again, check out that other tutorial if you want to try your hand at that. But they also now offer their Umbrel Home. I actually think this is out of stock currently, And that's going to be a theme that you find. Seems like a lot of people are getting these plug and play nodes. A lot of these different things are just out of stock, but you can put yourself on a wait list. But the Umbrel Home is definitely a beast. 2.9 gigahertz quad core CPU, so that's about 3 times faster than Raspberry Pi 4. Probably a little bit, faster and stronger than even the Raspberry Pi 5. You've got 16 gig dual channel RAM. That is quite a bit more memory than the Raspberry Pi, either of the models. So this thing is just gonna be a lot more performant, a lot faster, and is very appropriate if you wanna be running a lot of different services, or if you wanna be running a beefier Lightning node, or if you wanna be hosting different things, right? Hosting your own Nostr relay, having your own kind of hosted private chat communications, all sorts of different stuff you could do with this. It also comes with a 2 terabyte SSD storage, which is really, really nice. And it's something called an NVMe SSD storage. So it just means it's gonna be pretty performant, but it's very future-proofed in that regard. So 2 terabytes, you get 3 USB 3.0 ports, gigabit Ethernet connection, which is pretty standard. And then you're going to get a Bitcoin node running Bitcoin Core. And by default, you will get a LND Lightning node, although they do have an app now for C Lightning. Speaking of apps, this is absolutely the best in the business. They have the most all-encompassing app store I'm aware of. Although, as we will discuss, the StartOS marketplace is also pretty good. But if you're trying to do all sorts of different stuff on your node, Umbrel is very, very hard to beat in that regard. They also have some pretty nice backup features like automated encrypted backups that you can do for your Lightning channel state. So that helps with the potential challenges we were talking about earlier when it comes to mirroring and redundancy and that sort of stuff to ensure data integrity for your Lightning channels, which is very important, right? Every single either payment you send or receive or whatever, your Lightning channel states are being updated. So like the database in your Lightning node is being updated. So very, very important to maintain integrity of that. They have a 1-year warranty on the Umbrel Home, which is nice. Good and active customer support and community from what I've seen. So again, I'm not trying to, shill you on this, but it's just a really good option. Now, the potential downsides are that one, it is a little bit costlier, $699 price point. And for some people, they don't like the fact that they have what's called a polyform non-commercial license, meaning all their software is source viewable. You can go and audit and verify the source code, but you cannot fork it and use that for other commercial purposes, which violates the kind of purest definition of FOSS, free and open source software. And so if that is something that is critically important to you, you want to be aware of that with Umbrel. But all in all, really good option. So that's all I'll say with Umbrel. Let's move on now to Start9 and StartOS, which is their version of Umbrel OS, the node operating system that will be running. And so what's nice about Start9 is they've got quite a range of options. Of course, you can do it yourself, and I mentioned their documentation a moment ago. They also have these refurbished HP EliteDesk 800 G3s, which has a pretty good CPU actually, Intel quad-core, 16 gig RAM, so similar to the Umbrel Home. You have SSD storage options for either 2 or 4 terabytes, which is pretty cool. And to be clear, these SSDs are new, so the computer itself is refurbished, but the storage drives are new. It comes with a 3-month warranty, so a little bit less than the 1 year, but at the price point of $349 for the 2 terabyte option and $449 for the 4 terabyte option, that's a pretty interesting option. Again, if you're like, well, I don't really like the idea of this being refurbished, then obviously this is not for you. But if cost is a major consideration for you, that's actually a pretty powerful option there. Then we get to their kind of flagship model, the Start9 Server 1. So these are very similar specs as the HP EliteDesk we just discussed, except it's all brand new. It's also slightly faster. It comes with a 1-year warranty instead of 3 months. And so naturally, you're going to see the higher price point. This is sitting at $599 for 2 terabytes and $699 for 4. And then finally, you have the Server Pure. I think this one's actually currently sold out. But this thing is like an absolute beast. Double the CPU and RAM as the Server 1. Same 2 terabyte, 4 terabyte storage options. This is honestly probably best suited if you're like hosting a ton of stuff for like your whole extended family, or maybe like a small business and you want to have sort of all your self-sovereign computing stuff and hosting for your business along with your Bitcoin node that you use to accept, payments for your business. And so it's $13.99 for 2 terabytes, $14.99 for 4 terabytes. So again, significantly more expensive, definitely the most expensive options that we will cover. And so again, this is probably more aligned to a small business. And so regardless of those hardware options, you are getting Start9, which similar to Umbrel also has an excellent marketplace. I haven't literally done the one-to-one comparison, but suffice it to say, both of them look comparable. Umbrel maybe edges it out. And so Start9 Marketplace and the apps you can get access to are excellent. You can also get either the LND or C Lightning implementation of Lightning for the Lightning node that you will get along with Start9, or probably a little bit less community than I've seen with Umbrel, and a similar commercial license as Umbrel as well. Okay, let's move on to myNode. myNode is a classic one that goes a ways back. This has been an awesome project as well. You have the do-it-yourself option, of course, as with a lot of these. And you also have this interesting $99 premium software feature that you can add on to a do-it-yourself version. So that's a little bit unique. And the do-it-yourself version is supported for Raspberry Pi 4, I assume. I don't think there's support for 5 yet, as well as Rock 64, Rock Pro 64. And then they have their plug-and-play versions, of course. They have the Model 1 running on a Raspberry Pi 4, the specs of which we discussed earlier in the video. And you can get that for $399 for an 8 gig RAM version, along with 1 terabyte storage. And then it's $439 if you want to upgrade to 2 terabyte. Honestly, for me, again, this is just my personal commentary. I think at those price points, you probably either want to just like do it yourself or step up to one of the beefier options that we just discussed. Because those price points do start to get a little bit high considering that you're running a Raspberry Pi 4. Again, the 8 gig RAM is nice, but I do think that is a little bit lofty for what you're talking about. They also do have their Model 2, which is now an Intel quad-core CPU, 8 gig RAM. So looks a lot similar to the Umbrel Home and the Server 1, but you do have a price point there of $599. It does not look like they have a warranty, and while their App Store is okay, it is certainly not as expansive, at least from what I can see, as Start9 or Umbrel. And it also has a similar non-commercial license as Umbrel. Moving on, Raspiblitz. This is really focused on Lightning. They have a do-it-yourself version. As the name suggests, this is using a Raspberry Pi 4. They have plug-and-play versions that you can purchase from things like the Fulmo shop, which you can access from the Raspiblitz website. You can get an 8 gig for around $500. For those in the US, there's Lightning in a box, where you can get a 4 gig Raspberry Pi for around $370. Lots of that is sold out though. There's not as many apps, but if you're really, really gung-ho about Lightning, like if Lightning is your main thing and you're super committed to FOSS, this is a fully MIT open source license. So that is really nice. And Raspiblitz is a really, really strong community project. Again, though, for me, I just think those price points for what you're getting are a little high. You might as well do the do-it-yourself version. Okay, so next up is Cubit. I have done a whole tutorial on Cubit as well, the do-it-yourself version, if you want to see that. The do-it-yourself version is more expensive. They're going to send you the full kit, which is nice, so you don't have to kind of buy all the pieces piecemeal. But it is being sold for $589, which is quite a bit more expensive than other do-it-yourself versions. With that being said, the machinery is pretty excellent. They've got an Intel Celeron processor up to 2.9 gigahertz, 16 gigs of RAM. So again, this thing is going to look pretty similar to the Umbrel Home. 4 USB ports and 2 SATA ports, which is really unique and special for potential RAID redundancy that we were talking about. So particularly if you're doing a beefy Lightning node, this becomes a really, really good option. And furthermore, the plug and play version is only a little bit more than the do-it-yourself version. So for $649, you can get the plug and play basic version. Downside is that that's only 1 terabyte storage, but again, you have that upside of the additional SATA ports where you can connect additional drives yourself. And then the nice thing about the Cubit is it comes with Citadel. Citadel is going to look a lot like Umbrel, except it is pure FOSS, pure free and open source. It does not have the commercial restriction on the license. So if that's important for you, this becomes a good option. Although I will say Citadel just as a software is one, a little bit newer than Umbrel, and two, certainly has way fewer developers actually working on it. But again, if FOSS is your thing, Citadel and Cubit go really well together. Citadel can also be used on a Raspberry Pi 4. You don't have to have the Cubit hardware, but the Cubit hardware is really good on a similar par as the Umbrel Home. Next, we get to Ronin Dojo. So of course there is a do-it-yourself version for the Ronin Dojo, which supports Rock 64 and Rock Pro 64 boards. And then they have their plug-and-play Tanto, which looks pretty slick. It uses a Rock Pro 64 computer, 1.8 gigahertz, 4 gig RAM, so a little bit less memory than some of the other options like Umbrel Home and the Server 1. The 1 terabyte option for the Tanto comes in at $549. So again, you can see my point earlier, right? Like everything is pretty competitive. In cases where you're paying for more, you are, for the most part, getting more. And they are rolling out their 2 terabyte version as we speak. So stay tuned for that if you are interested in Ronin Dojo. And they're rolling that out for $649. But the really big value of the Ronin Dojo and the Tanto is that it comes with Ronin UI, which is the Node software, which is designed specifically for Samurai Wallet. If you are brand new to Samurai Wallet, I have done a whole tutorial on that. I've done multiple tutorials on the Whirlpool CoinJoin implementation that is embedded in Samurai. If privacy is your thing, this is the option for you. There is just no better in the game than Samurai Wallet and a node that was built for purpose to work with the Samurai Wallet. You have Whirlpool CLI built directly into Ronin UI and the Ronin Dojo, meaning you can just remix your UTXOs in Whirlpool 24/7, nonstop, forever and ever. They are fully maniacally open source. Doesn't really have apps per se, but again, you could argue that's a good thing if it's really focused on Bitcoin. It doesn't support Lightning either, but again, if privacy is your thing, you cannot do much better than the Ronin Dojo. Now, there are some honorable mentions. There's the Bitcoin Machine, there's Nodl, but I don't think either of them contribute incrementally or are unique beyond some of the options we've already discussed. And then beyond this important decision, there are some more advanced topics that you may want to consider jotting down and researching at a later time. I'll probably come back and do a video on them in the future. This video is already getting pretty long, but it's about hardening the security on your node, considering things like a firewall, considering things like VPN to mask your home IP. So there's definitely other topics that, again, I'll try and cover in future videos. So we looked at a ton of different options there. I am going to do my very best to create a table of all that we covered, and I'm going to try and flash that up now. So if I do that, pause this video so you can take a look at everything we covered, hopefully in summary form. My conclusions here and personal recommendations, again, do with this information what you will. My goal for this video was primarily to lay out the options that are out there. But if you ask for my personal recommendations, I think if your use case is really one of a hobbyist, one of learning about this process, of contributing to the network, and of really you just want to like validate your own transactions and not trust someone else's node, I would encourage you to do it yourself. And either with the Raspberry Pi 5, so you might have to wait a little bit to do that, or with one of the other boards that we discussed. I just think that is a really constructive experience and learning opportunity. But if for whatever reason you're like, no, look, I just want the plug and play, or you want to run these additional services and make it a more proper home server, I would personally at this point go with the Umbrel Home or the Start9 Server 1. I think pound for pound on a cost adjusted basis, those are simply the best there. Although I will give honorable mention to the Cubit because that is also really badass hardware, as well as the Ronin Dojo if privacy is your thing. So there you have it. Comparison of different nodes. This was a lot of research, so I hope you found this valuable and insightful. If you did, you already know what to do. Give this video a like. Use the share feature underneath this video. That really does help get this to a broader audience. And if you were so enamored with this content, you want to donate to a pleb, which really does help me continue to make these videos, you can do so in a number of ways. There's the YouTube Super Thanks feature built directly into YouTube. If you happen to be using something like the Get Alby browser extension, you can just click that and it'll automatically detect you're watching my channel. You can send some sats over the Lightning Network that way. Or if you want to send some sats to my Lightning address, you can send to me at www.ianmajor.xyz, Or if you have any issues with that, you can send it to ragermajor@getalby.com. I also have a QR code here if that is easier to scan. And while I hope this video and my other tutorials are incredibly helpful, if you want additional hand-holding, if you want one-on-one mentorship or consulting on actually walking you through some of this, you can reach out to me on Vita. Vita is an excellent platform I'm using more and more. So again, I'm always active in the comments, but as the channel grows, that starts to get a little bit more difficult. So if you have deeper questions, or if you want like literally hopping on a video call and walking through some of this, one-on-one, reach out to me on Vita. We can set up a call through that platform and we can walk through things together. But we'll go ahead and leave this here. As a reminder, every sat counts. And until next time, I'll see you then.